D. Watkins here with Salon TV, and today I'm here with an extremely special person, a talented brother that I look up to a lot, CEO of Robinhood, author of The Other Wes Moore. Wes Moore, how you doing today?
My guy, it's good to see you. And let me
Amongst
tell you something.
amongst other books. We're about to get into your new book now, but I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, and I got to tell you, man, like my pride in you and my admiration for you is boundless, man. I mean, just because you lead with truth, you lead with honesty, you lead with heart, and there is no one I know who is more talented in being able to not just put out important stories, but just frankly to remind our community that we speak for ourselves. You lead the tide, man. So it's always a blessing to be with you,
you
bro.
set a great example. you
Thank you.
set a great example. You set a great example. So thank you. Speaking of Robinhood, how have things been? You know, we see that COVID has had a massive impact on joblessness, and you know, poverty is your big issue. So what's going on?
You know, it's I think people when people talk about what impact or what percentage of the portfolio, whatever, has been impacted by COVID, the answer actually for me is really easy. It's all of it. This thing has had a disastrous impact on our community. And it's not just the fact that you know, it's not just the health implications, the fact that this thing has attacked Black and brown folks at double the rate in terms of, you know, in terms of actually, you know, transmission, but also death rates. But it's the economic implications. And it's actually been a really important moment when I even think about the role that Robinhood and any organization that's in the poverty fighting space really plays in this, right? Because we have to be able to approach it with a real level of humility. We watched 11 years of job growth go away in 11 weeks due to this thing. 11 weeks has just knocked it out. We've watched the fact that 23% of all jobs that have been lost due to COVID-19 were people who were already living in poverty. So think about that, right? 23% of people who have lost their jobs because of COVID-19 were living in poverty before COVID-19, i.e. these were the working poor. These are the ones who were working jobs, in many cases, multiple jobs, and still living below the poverty line. And so this whole idea and this narrative, when you hear people talk about, well, they should just get a job. How about the majority of them had jobs and just weren't getting paid enough? We're still living below the poverty line. And so, I mean, I think about Robinhood, where, you know, we're one of the largest organizations in the poverty fighting space in the country. I mean, literally, we have dispensed over $3 billion into this work. Schools, you know, education, housing, transportation, early childhood, mental, physical health, criminal justice reform, all along the lines, then places that we funded. But when you talk about what has been the impact of COVID, D, it is, we've never seen anything like this, and particularly in the speed, duration that this thing is going to have on our communities. And so while philanthropy is going to have a really important role to play, our social organizations are going to have a really important role to play. The truth is that there are not going to be $1 million solutions to $1 trillion problems. We've got $1 trillion problems.
And what a time to come when we have such a poor leadership, a president who takes these things as a joke. Like he's running around championing Nazis and making fun of the deaths of innocent Black people.
Like we're talking about something where the danger about COVID is that it has attacked the most vulnerable. Right? So when people say, well, COVID impacts everybody, true. However, it's not impacting everybody proportionally. This thing attacks the most vulnerable. It attacks people with pre-existing conditions. It attacks children who are growing up with asthma, which, by the way, if you look at West Baltimore, almost half of the kids are suffering from asthma. It attacks people who have heart disease. It attacks people who have diabetes. That's the danger. That is the real danger when we're talking about, you know, when we're talking about COVID-19. And the thing is, when you're looking at which jobs, with the economics are the ones that are being most impacted, 2/3 of all the jobs that have been lost have been people who've been within service industries, right? Restaurants, hotels, that type of thing. Who's making up those jobs? That's us. That's us. A lot of those jobs are the low wage jobs, the entry level jobs, and these can be the most difficult for people to be able to recover from. And so when we're looking at the long-term impacts of all this stuff. And this is one of the big reasons why I push on, the role of policy in all of this. We can, Dr. King had a quote where he said, philanthropy is commendable. And it actually sits on my desk back in the office that I haven't been in 4 months. but the quote says, philanthropy is commendable, but the philanthropist can never forget the economic injustice that makes philanthropy necessary. This is economic injustice of what's taking place. This is an economic injustice that's taken place on Black people and brown people and people of color inside this country. And so we have to be able to be honest about the fact that we're not just dealing with these individual pieces that we need to fund and organizations that we need to, these are structures that we have to be able to upend. And these are systems that we have to be able to reinvent and reproduce.
So I want to get into this book, 5 Days, The Reckoning of an American City. It's been 5 years since the death of Freddie Gray, who died as a result of injuries he received while in police custody. Since the death of Gray, Baltimore has continued to go viral for a number of crazy things. The Gun Trace Task Force, which was a group of rogue cops that robbed citizens and sold drugs. Al Mayer being caught up in a book scandal. In broad daylight, Al Mayer being caught up in a children's book scandal that netted her over $500,000. And the president coming at our city, calling it rat infested and attacking the late great Elijah Cummings. And you walk us right into this world. So just give us a snapshot of some of the things that was going into your mind as you decided to put this book together.
Yeah, and first, I want to say too, just how much I appreciate you and your voice throughout not just everything that was happening 5 years ago, but also just making sure that people don't forget. It's amazing. We're watching this process right now taking place, and how it feels like society is acting like this is brand new. It's not brand new. And, and I'll hear people sometimes say, well, it's like, wow, the timing of this book is really amazing. And it's like, part of the horror of that is name a time when this wasn't appropriate.
Exactly.
Name exactly. A time, and so again, not only do I thank you for for all your leadership and making sure that people don't forget it. I was working on this with Erica Green, who I know you know really well too.
I love. Shout out to Erica. Erica's amazing.
Shout out to
amazing
Erica,
writer,
man.
Amazing journalist, just an amazing person all the way around.
And it's an amazing person, amazing friend, and so I remember first going through, and actually I tell you, D, one of the things that actually triggered me to be able to want to tell this was my own complicity in all this. Where I was like, I went to Freddie's funeral and I remember looking around. So first of all, it was one of the only funerals I've ever been to in my life I'm at the funeral of someone who I never knew. Because it was more, I felt like a spectacle. Like everybody was there. Everybody showed up. I mean, what was there? 2,500 people,
Yeah, it was packed. It was packed. I was up in there. It was packed. It was packed.
And I knew that. And so I'm sitting there and I actually didn't even want to take the walk up to go to the casket because I didn't feel like I earned that. And I feel like that was part of the problem, was that we had spent, all these people were there, but then you sit there and you're looking around the room and you're wondering about how many of these people are actually willing to do what it's actually going to take to make sure that this doesn't happen anymore. The fact that when we're looking up and you remember, we see the banner that says Black Lives Matter and how people are saying, like, do people understand the inherent contradiction of all this? That we're sitting there with a casket with Black Lives Matter being profiled up behind it, right? And so what I then wanted to do is be able to just really explore that period of time, that 5-day period, and starting off with the Saturday and ending off with the Wednesday, and really take it day by day and look at it through the eyes of these 8 different people who all come from different strata, different perspective, different reasons why they're there, different things that brought them to this, and be able to really ask some hard questions about what is our level of complicity, our societal level of complicity, that these things keep happening, but people continue to act like it's brand new. What is okay.
You answer like the biggest question in the book. Why this city? Why this reaction right now? To me, you answer it in the first couple of pages when you just break down the timeline of Freddie's life. because the story is such a Baltimore story.
Yes.
And there's so many people in Baltimore, and they all don't have the same fate as Freddie, but at the same time, the lead poison, the poor schoolings, or unequipped teachers who don't really know how to handle a student like Freddie, or recognize his or her talent, or be able to give them what they need so that they can advance, and then getting erased in the system.
That's right.
And when people have that backstory, it becomes so easy to forget about them.
I'm telling you, D, and shout out to Chris Jackson, who's my editor for this book, because that actually wasn't in there initially. We just went went from the intro, and then I just went right into the stories. And Chris, shout out to Chris. Chris pushed back and was like, something's missing. You've got to ground the reader in what we're talking about. And we were going back and forth about what that is. And then he was like, how about you just lay out a timeline of his life?
So for people who don't know, could you just briefly tell, you don't have to go through the whole timeline, but for people who are not aware with Freddie Gray's case, or for people who forgot, because, sadly it's happened to so many people. Could you just give our watchers just a brief synopsis?
Absolutely. And you bring up an important point too, right? Because, people think that, there was Freddie, but we have to remember, in just the 24 months prior, there was Chris Brown, and there was Anthony Anderson, and there was Tyrone West. And so you saw how Freddie Gray wasn't an anomaly. Freddie Gray was a continuation when you looked at what was happening within Baltimore. And for the timeline on Freddie's life, Freddie was born premature and underweight, him and his twin sister, Frederica. They were also both born addicted to heroin. Their mother has battled addiction for much of her life. She never made it to high school, and has lived in poverty all of her life. And she gives birth to Freddie and Frederica. They're in the hospital for a few months, just until the babies are able to gain enough weight that they can actually then leave the hospital. And when they leave the hospital, they move into a housing project over in North Carey Street, which is, for those who know, it's over in West Baltimore. And that house, along with over 400 other homes in 2009, is named in a civil lawsuit because of the endemic levels of lead that are inside that house. The CDC indicates that 6 microbes of lead in every deciliter of blood is enough to give a person cognitive damage for the rest of their life, right? 6. Freddie had 36. So this was a person who was suffering from severe cognitive damage for much of his life. And as you pointed out, Dee, had been placed in special, special education courses and coursework throughout his entire academic career because of the lead poisoning. The last time that the Baltimore City public school system had his recorded attendance was when he was in 10th grade, and he was 19 years old. He'd watched his stepbrother killed just a year and a half before he died. And so this is a person who, when you look at Freddie's life, he was born underweight, addicted to heroin, lead poisoned. And by that time in his life, he's 2 years old. What shot did Freddie have? What opportunity? When people say, well, people should just work harder, how hard would Freddie had to have worked in order to even have a shot? And when Chris gave that push, it was like, that is absolutely right. Like, you have to look at those 5 days in that context. You have to understand what happened in Baltimore in the context of the fact that we are still not even giving our kids a chance. And so the idea of what happens to them, or what decisions they make, and this and that, it was important to ground the reader in what exactly we're talking about here. And so when he has that final interaction with these 6 officers, the reality is Freddie could have died 100 times before that. And so when we're watching a 25-year-old man who's now having this interaction with law enforcement, and people are saying, people talk about, well, Freddie was a thug. What are you talking about? And it's important to ground people in exactly this dynamic as we're having these conversations, both about his life, but then both about, you know, everything surrounding his death and also the aftermath in the entire city.
Yeah, and all of those things are definitely important to consider. And before you jump out there and call this person a thug, talk about the failed war on drugs and
Yeah.
how his 18 arrests almost led to no convictions. These are like, this is the war on drugs. This is how we pad our stats and make ourselves look like we're tough on crime, when actually we have a system that just ruins lives over and over and over again. The key thing you said that is extremely important, and getting people to understand why your book is so important, is this whole idea of context. About me, I've grew up in poverty. I've lived in public housing for different parts most of my life. I've you know, wasn't friends with Freddie, but was separated by two people, one person over and over again. So my lens is I'm angry, I'm upset, I feel it. I know that my brother, my cousin, myself, any of us could have been in that situation, because we've been in the back of them vans, and we've been in the back of the vans without cuffs on, or we've been thrown in back of them vans, like how Freddie was thrown in head first. You know, a lot of people don't know he died from it was a shallow diving accident. So when he was thrown into the van, that's how he sustained the injury. But so I'm looking at it, you know, I'm angry, but at the same time, you have different people, you know, who might look at the situation different. A person who lives in the suburbs, a person who was a police officer, a person who just happened to be, you know, hanging out, and their life was forever transformed by what happened after Freddie died. So talk about the different, you do a great job at introducing us to this array of people who all come at it from a different angle. How did you choose those people?
Yeah, that honestly, D, that was one of the more complex thing, because as you know, Baltimore is a city of characters. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
you could go all over the place and find people that would fill in. But you know, but it really came down to how was I going to select, you know, 8 that in some ways encapsulated different aspects of the society. But the process of elimination was actually one of the hardest things about it, right? But you know, but we end up landing on being able to tell the stories of people like, you know, people like Tawanda Jones, you know, a woman who has been protesting the death of her brother in police custody and is now marching right alongside the Gray family, and is proud of the fact that Baltimore is standing up, but at the same time has these feelings of, but where was this when my brother was
Right.
killed, right?
Uh-huh.
Where every Wednesday she protests and still does to
Every
this day.
Wednesday. Every Wednesday.
Every
West
Wednesday.
Wednesdays. Every
And she
Wednesday.
does not stop. I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing, right? Being able to add in, you know, a story like like a Mark Partee, right? A major in the Baltimore police force who comes up from West Baltimore, and who is basically saying, you know, and he told me, and I never forget this conversation when he said, you know, I don't think that any of my fellow officers, none of them woke up that morning with homicide in their minds. He said, but I understand why for the kids in West Baltimore, why they don't believe me. And I will never forget when he said that.
That's a powerful moment.
That's a powerful moment. He said, I know none of them woke up with homicide in their minds, but I also understand why the kids in West Baltimore, why they don't believe me. You know, go get the perspective of Greg Butler, you know, a former basketball star in Baltimore who escaped death on so many different occasions, and now gets a scholarship to college and is going to go play basketball in college, only to find out that because of a mess up within the Baltimore city system of transmission of grades, that he loses his scholarship. And now he was like, I thought I had a pathway. I thought I had what I had, the thing that I needed in order to get out. And you know, I don't want to give it away to the readers, but I mean, I know you remember the Dawson family, and his connection to the Dawson family happened in Baltimore. So it's like, here's a guy who was doing everything right, and to no fault of his own, because of a system glitch, loses his scholarship. And now he's coming out and he goes from basketball star to protester. And he's protesting more than just Freddie. He's protesting the entire system that's been created. You know, a John Angelos, you know, the son of the owner of the Baltimore Orioles, who is having to make one of the final decisions about, do they play a game with no fans? And he says, yes, because I want the world to see it. Anthony Williams, you know, the general manager of Shake and Bake, you know, a place that I first went to Shake and Bake when I was 13 years old. you know? But I mean, like, but how all this impacts him, and he's a small business owner, but how he's in a small business owner and a community leader. And throughout this whole process, he's trying to understand, how do people not see, even if you just look at Pennsylvania Avenue and what's happened in Pennsylvania Avenue over the past 30 years, how do people not understand that we saw this coming? We saw this coming. And so I wanted to take the readers on this journey through these 8 very different people, through
Uh-huh.
these 8 very different lenses, but how the thing of and the power of this moment was actually this crash between all of them, and how we just realize, and it's just a reminder to all of us, just how thin that line is between our life and somebody else's life, and particularly when tragedy and crisis becomes the glue that actually brings folks together.
Yeah, I connected with so many of those stories, especially just even like Butler and what some of the other young people had been through. Because I've just being a person who writes and who travels and who speaks about these things, I've come across people on the road, and when they have these conversations about what happened to Freddie Gray or what happened in Baltimore, too many times I feel like they forget the young people who actually brought that energy into the city, that made the world pay attention, that made the system chase reform, that made people want to say, wait, we're doing something wrong here. How do we right this wrong? And even though, I consider the consent decree to be a huge fail so far, but at the same time, that's just a different conversation. But
Yeah.
I feel like those young people, they're not, we all have to do a better job at supporting them and making sure they're okay and making sure they get what they need, because again, it's a lot of people talk about Freddie now, but there's a lot of kids out there who still need that help. When I work on these types of projects, when I write books and articles, and when I do research, I always learn something about myself, and I always learn something about the area, the neighborhood, or the city that I'm researching. What did you learn about yourself by doing this, and did you learn
Mm,
anything new about Baltimore?
that's a really good question. I think one of the things that I learned about the thing that I really learned about myself, man, is it really did add a level of history and humility that I think I don't think I fully
Mm,
embraced before. Where I mean, and I say history and humility where, again, I think about my own work where, I run this organization. It's a really big organization that focuses on every one of these issues that we talk about within this story gets profiled and highlighted and funded and built out through the organization. And I'm really proud of the work that we've been able to do. And how do you increase proximity? We're now investing in Baltimore. We've never
mm,
done that organization before, but we're now doing it, right? We're focusing on policy more, not that kind of thing. But you realize, man, it's like you cannot understand where we are now without understanding history and trauma. You cannot do it unless you're fully willing to embrace the intentionality of the separation that exists. And I think it's one thing to come up in it, like we came up in it, and it's another thing to actually become a student of it. And I think this process forced me to become a student of it, to not just understand it inherently, because yeah, it's like this, like we just know it because we know it, but actually say,
right.
no, 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 no. Actually dig into redlining. Actually dig into discriminatory housing. Actually just dig into discriminatory lending policies. Actually dig into the fact that the GI Bill was used to build up an entire middle class, despite the fact that it excluded Black people, right?
And
Actually
we
dig
fought in the
into
war.
no, you know what I'm saying? Like, but actually dig into that. Because I think there's a difference between understanding it because that's how, like, inherently understand it, and actually becoming a student of it. And this process forced me to become a student of it, where it added a real level of not just intensity to try to do something about it, but a humility about the fact that so much of what we're doing right now, unless you can dig into that stuff, it's elementary, man. It's like
I,
it's nibbling around
I,
edges.
I find it troubling, just living in Baltimore, being from Baltimore, and being in some of the circles that I am now, that I'm in now. I talk to a lot of politicians, and I talk to a whole lot of people who have power to change some of these things, or to at least start the conversations about change in the places where the conversations need to be had. And
Yeah.
I'm just in awe at the amount of people who don't even know the history of this city. They don't know about the GI Bill. They don't know how the suburbs were built. They don't know about redlining. They don't know about Blockbuster. They don't know about anything and stuff. For like, I just wonder why get into public service, or why would you try to serve the public and not understand the roots of some of these problems? Because that's the key into trying to solve them. And wondering that, and I know you know all of this stuff, and you studied, and you're brilliant, and you've had success. But how do you gauge success? Because we all know that one person or one organization is not going to flip hundreds of years of problems. But at the same time, there's so many wins on your journey. So how do you gauge success?
No, I love that question, because honestly, D, it's one of the things that I still very much wrestle with, where one of my challenges when I talk about complicity is actually that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where I think it's beautiful for the fact that people are like, listen, will you come spend time and talk to us about this issue and help us to understand? It's beautiful when they're like, listen, D, can you come and tell us and write a book or tell a story that helps to illuminate? Like, that's beautiful. And it's important, because it then means that not only is there a level of appreciation of us as individuals, it's appreciation of the story we have to tell, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, there is a exceptionalism of it that's really hard and disturbing. There is an idea of saying, like, one of the beautiful things about you, one of the beautiful things I try to find with my situation is we can go in any environment and be comfortable, right? Like, you can seriously go down and spend time hanging out on MLK, and then the next day go spend time hanging out in the Hamptons or hanging out down in Washington. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're agile. That it's like you are fully accepted and incorporated into all these various environments, right? Myself the same way. But there is a level of exceptionalism about that does become very frustrating in that, where you want the celebration to not be seen as a pacification.
Right.
You don't want the celebration to be seen as, oh, no, look, I get it, and I'm enlightened. See, like, I'm having Wes come and talk to my group. Or see, oh, no, I get it, I'm enlightened. I'm having, I'm ordering these books for, no. That can't be enough.
Right.
And so I think part of the pressure that we all have in that situation is, how exactly are we using that platform in everywhere that we are and every way we go to call that out? To be able to understand the fact that, I think it's beautiful that people actually want to engage in this. It's beautiful that people, find not just a level of time, but a level of appreciation in the work that you do. But it's also about the fact that, but if you want to hear my opinions on it, be ready for my opinions on it. If you want to hear what I think, be ready to hear what I think. Right. Because what I think is that there is a level of it that it's not enough to indict individuals. We have to indict systems. We have to indict systems. And those systems oftentimes exist because people have benefited from the systems. It goes back to this thing that, I think about it, where it's one of the frustrating things I know oftentimes when we think about this idea of racism, right? Where people think racism is an individual act. Right? They're just like, well, I'm not racist, or no, racism is saying, like, okay, I don't wear a hood, right? Or I don't say the N-word, so therefore I'm not racist. And it's like, no, you have to get out of the idea that racism is an act. Racism is a system, right? It's a system that allows a Black person with a college degree to earn less than a white high school dropout. That is a fact. That is a statistical fact, and that is a system. It's a system that allows Black Americans to die at twice the rate from COVID-19 as white Americans. It's a system that makes it 42% more likely for a Black woman to die of breast cancer than a white woman who also has breast cancer. And so I think, when we think about this work and again, you bring up a really important question, because I know it's something I still very much wrestle with. It's this idea that, this is a system that has been built and reinforced for 400 years. I mean, we are having this conversation today, D, on Juneteenth.
Juneteenth.
So, I mean, since the first ships arrived on our shores in 1619, carrying the lives and the labor who would build the wealth of this nation. And I think that what I want and what I always want people to understand with me is, while I appreciate the fact that my words or my books or what I'll tell you are things that you want to, I appreciate the fact that you're like, listen, I'm asking because I want to learn. I'm asking because I want to educate myself. I'm asking because, and I've really, and part of the goal with 5 days, I was like, if you really want to know both where I think, and if you really want to know about history and all that, and how this stuff goes in context, read this. Because you'll walk away saying, hopefully, and if you don't, I don't know what to tell you, but you'll walk away saying, I get it.
And then the book is the start. And after you read the book, then you have to do the follow-up. Then you have to do the self-work, and have to do another one of your books. You have to do the work.
That's right. That's when the work begins, right? It's and that I want to tell people is well, what does it mean to be anti-racist, right? And like, people get scared about this term. I was like, there's nothing to be scared about. What an anti-racist is, it's both identifying these realities and then being willing to do something about it, right? So like the stats I just named about the fact that a black college graduate has the same earning power as a white high school dropout. A person who is not racist says, that's crazy. A person who is anti-racist says, so what are we going to do about it, right? And that's why I'm just like, it's as simple as that. It's the difference between being an observer and being an actor in it. And I want people to be an actor. I want people to see what's going on and actually have an active role in order to undo it.
With that, and acknowledging these systems and a lot of problems that they have, there's been a lot of talk about defunding police and trying to reallocate some of those funds into places that will be more beneficial to communities of color. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I mean, and it's interesting because I want people to understand why are these conversations even happening, right? So the reason why these conversations are even happening, to be clear, people have to understand, take a look at the budget for Baltimore City alone, right? I explain to people, if you look at the health and wellness budget for Baltimore City, it hovers at around $42 million, around that. The budget for the police department is what, 509 million?
Yeah.
So I just want people to have context on what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about a distinct reality where, if you look at budgets, what budgets fundamentally are, they're moral documents, right? They're documents of basically you telling me what is important to you, what matters to you, and what do you spend time on, and what do you then turn around and fund. And we can do it both with municipal budgets, and we can do it with personal budgets. D, if you show me what you spend your money on every month, I can tell you what's probably important to you. Same thing with me. If I show you what I spend my money on, you probably get a sense of, okay, X is important to Wes, Y is important to Wes, Z is probably not important to Wes because he doesn't spend a whole lot of money on it. But you can get a sense just simply looking at budgets. And the reality is that we are getting a very clear indication about what's important and what's not important when we look at budgets. Just simply look at how money is being spent. And by the way, it's our money and money that's being spent on our behalf. And so, when I think about what that means and how exactly we allocate capital, I look at it and I say, and I remember I was actually talking with the folks from LBS. Well, for those who don't know, LBS is Leaders Beautiful Struggle. We were having a conversation where I was like, I'm very much aligned with what he's saying. I was like, and I don't want to abolish the force, because I think there's a necessity for having it. But do I think that we put far too much weight and far too much pressure, and we expand this definition of policing in a way that's incredibly dangerous to communities? Absolutely. Do I think this excessive militarization that we have for policing is useful or helpful or cost effective? Absolutely not. I want to make sure that we have a force that is committed to doing things like abolishing police brutality. and abolishing racial profiling and abolishing all the other aspects that sounds like we're in the process of doing now, the no-knock warrants and all this kind of stuff that should never have been in place in the first place. But that
Yeah.
actually means taking an internal look at the entire system and being able to really do a true self-audit of what aspects of the system do you actually need and have to have in place when it comes to creating a true mechanism that prompts and promotes safety and security in communities and does it on an even basis, because we do not have that right now.
Yeah, I think people get defunding mixed up with abolishment. Like
Exactly.
I think they always get those two terms mixed up. So I'm glad you broke it down like that. George Floyd cracked a race war open. We see so much happening in our country right now, nationwide protests, global calls for help. Do you see anything positive out of this? Do you think the world is finally going to get it? Or when the pandemic ends and people go back to work and all of the businesses start to open up and people start having their cocktail parties and their day parties and their mixers, is it going to go back? Is everything going to go back to being the same?
Yeah, I mean, listen, hope springs eternal. You know, I do. I hope and I pray. And I really do think we've actually have seen certain movements in the right direction. I think one thing that I've noticed is for things that you've been saying and I've been saying for years is like this is not exaggeration. Like these discrepancies aren't hyperbole. We're not making stuff up. They're real. And the sound of a police siren sounds different. The pitch is different depending on what community you're in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one thing that I've seen that actually there's a relative level of positiveness that we've seen is that I think not just our society, but the world at large, they get it now. We're not having to justify that argument anymore in an important way. The thing that I want people to understand though is, and I think we have to be very aggressive on, is if we just think that banning chokeholds is the point, then we're missing the point. Mm-hmm. That the demand for justice is, yes, it's about justice for George Floyd, and we need justice for his murder. It is about a justice on demanding police accountability, but also it's economic justice.
Straight up.
It's health justice. It's environmental justice. It's housing justice. It's educational justice. Like, we want justice. We want justice of all forms. And the thing that I am hopeful. I am hopeful that at the end of this, because you and I'm thinking about, all the other people who are using their voice in such powerful ways, whether it's folks like, Aaron Maben and Kwame out there in the streets, or whether it's policymakers or business leaders, whatever. I'm hopeful that we can have a unified conversation about justice, of every single definition of the word justice. And that's when I think about what is a takeaway from Mr. Floyd and the takeaway from his murder is I want justice to be served. And justice doesn't just mean for individuals. It means How are we creating a system that actually creates pathways and opportunities for people who, frankly, the world is now awakening to the fact that there's this level of injustice that exists for so many people.
And it's time to become an actor. Thank you for the book, and thank you for doing this. Tell everybody when and where they can get the book.
Thank you, brother, and thank you. So it is June 23rd. It will be available everywhere. It's available everywhere for pre-order right now, and the audio and the ebook are available right now. For all your local book buyers and book places, the same place where you buy D's book, you'll be able to buy this book. Support Black businesses and support Black bookstores, please. Support local bookstores and small bookstores, please. But I'm just thankful for this opportunity, and thankful for all of y'all who will watch this. Thank you for your belief in a better tomorrow, because we're committed to it and we're going to keep pushing for it.
Thank you.